3 weeks later, Karen sipped her morning coffee while scrutinizing the neighborhood through strategically positioned binoculars. Her living room window offered a perfect surveillance position over Primrose Lane, and what she saw made her nearly choke on her French roast. Mike Davidson was installing a garden in his front yard, not a tasteful arrangement of HOA-approved perennials, but a sprawling vegetable garden with raised wooden beds that violated at least 7 different regulations. Worse still, he had help. The Johnsons, the Garcias, and even the Bennetts were there, digging and laughing like some kind of suburban commune. "Greg," Karen's voice echoed through the house. "Get the camera." By noon, Karen had documented every violation, printed 20 copies of the relevant HOA regulations, and was marching across the street with Greg reluctantly trailing behind her. "Colonel Davidson," Karen announced, clipboard in hand. "This garden installation has not been approved by the Architectural Committee and violates regulations 8D through 22B regarding approved landscaping features." Mike straightened up, wiping soil from his hands. "Good morning, Karen. Would you like some lemonade? Sarah just made it fresh." "I'm not here for refreshments. I'm here because this," she gestured at the wooden beds, "is explicitly prohibited." To Karen's dismay, Melissa Johnson stepped forward. "Actually, we've been discussing this at the last few HOA meetings that you've called. The ones you said were too trivial to attend." Karen blinked. "What meetings?" "The ones where we voted to amend the landscaping regulations," Tom Bennett explained, leaning on a shovel. "It passed 15-2. That's impossible. Any changes require my signature as president." Karen's voice rose an octave. Sarah Davidson approached, offering a folder. "Here's a copy of the amendment, along with the signatures. We also filed it with the county last week." Karen flipped through the documents in disbelief. Everything appeared legal and properly executed. This is mutiny," she sputtered. "It's democracy," Mike corrected. "And by the way, the garden isn't just for us. It's going to be a community garden. Everyone gets a share." Something in Karen snapped. Years of carefully constructed order threatened to crumble before her eyes. "You've been here less than a month, and you think you can just change rules that have protected this community for a decade." "Protected it from what, Karen?" asked Melissa gently. "From living? From enjoying our homes? From becoming like Maple Street?" Karen shot back, referring to the neighboring development where property values had declined after residents were allowed to paint their doors whatever colors they wanted. A community without standards was no community at all. But looking around at her neighbors' faces, Karen realized with sinking clarity that she was alone in this fight. Even Linda, her loyal vice president, was helping Sarah plant tomato seedlings. "Fine," Karen said, her voice cold. "Plant your garden. But when property values plummet and the neighborhood goes to ruin, don't come crying to me." She turned and walked stiffly back to her house, ignoring the invitations to stay and help. Inside, she slumped onto her sofa, genuinely shaken. For 10 years, her identity had been synonymous with Primrose Lane's HOA. Now, in just 3 weeks, the Davidsons had undermined everything. "Maybe it's time to ease up a bit," Greg suggested carefully, sitting beside her. "Remember how you used to make those cookies for the block parties? Everyone loved those." "That was before I understood what was at stake," Karen replied, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. That evening, Karen watched from her window as neighbors gathered around the Davidsons' newly constructed garden. They were sharing a potluck dinner, children running between the raised beds playing tag. It looked fun. When was the last time Karen had had fun? Her doorbell rang, startling her from her thoughts. Sarah Davidson stood on her porch, holding a covered dish. "We missed you at dinner," Sarah said simply. "I brought you some lasagna." Karen accepted the dish wordlessly, unsure how to respond to this unexpected kindness from her new adversary. "Look," Sarah continued, "Mike and I didn't move here to cause trouble." After Sarah left, Karen placed the untouched lasagna in her refrigerator and resumed her position by the window. But something had shifted inside her. For the first time in years, she wondered if there might be another way to protect the neighborhood she loved so dearly. She pulled out her violation notebook, flipping through pages of meticulously documented infractions. Then, in a moment that surprised even herself, she closed it and set it aside. Tomorrow would be soon enough for battles. Tonight, the fragrant aroma of Sarah's lasagna beckoned, promising something Karen had denied herself for far too long. Community. The shrill scream pierced through the tranquil Saturday morning like a siren. "Police, stop right there," shouted Karen Winters as she tackled the bewildered mailman on the Johnsons' freshly manicured lawn. Her HOA enforcement badge, purchased from a party supply store and laminated at FedEx last Tuesday, glinted in the morning sun as she pinned the terrified postal worker to the ground. "Ma'am, I'm just delivering mail," he protested, his official USPS hat tumbling across the forbidden grass that, according to HOA Regulation 27B6, was not to be traversed by foot traffic between the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. "Tell it to the judge," Karen hissed, reaching for the plastic zip ties she kept in her fanny pack for just such occasions. At 52 years old, with her platinum blonde bob and matching tracksuit, Karen had single-handedly transformed Primrose Lane from a quiet suburban cul-de-sac into what her neighbors now called the prison of perpetual pettiness. The commotion drew homeowners from their houses, including Melissa Johnson, who rushed out in her bathrobe. "Karen, that's the mailman. Let him go this instant." Karen reluctantly released her captive, brushing grass from her knees as she stood. "He was cutting across your lawn, Melissa. That's a violation of—" "I don't care. He delivers our mail 6 days a week. He can walk wherever he wants." Melissa helped the shaken mailman to his feet, apologizing profusely. Karen's face hardened. This is exactly why property values are stagnating. Nobody respects the rules anymore. She marched back to her colonial-style home at the end of the street, its white exterior practically gleaming compared to the others. Her husband, Greg, a mild-mannered accountant who had long ago surrendered to his wife's crusades, was reading the newspaper at the kitchen table. "Another incident?" he asked without looking up. "They just don't understand, Greg. Order is what separates us from animals," Karen replied, pouring herself a cup of coffee. She glanced out the window at the Robinsons' house, noting with narrowed eyes the unauthorized wind chime hanging from their porch. She made a note in her violations notebook, already filled with dozens of infractions ranging from garbage bins left out past 9 a.m. to unapproved shade of eggshell white on shutters. Karen hadn't always been this way. 10 years ago, she was just Karen Miller, a middle school English teacher known for her kind heart and chocolate chip cookies. Then came the incident with the developer who built towering apartments overlooking their backyard, destroying their privacy and slashing their property value by $30,000 overnight. The Homeowners Association had done nothing. The city council ignored their petition. So Karen took matters into her own hands, running for HOA president on a platform of never again. She won in a landslide and transformed from defender to dictator within a year. Her phone buzzed. A text from her HOA vice president, Linda, with a photo of the Garcia's trash can left on the curb past noon. Karen smiled grimly. She had meetings with the landscaping committee and the architectural review board today, but she could squeeze in a confrontation with the Garcias before lunch. As she reached for her HOA binder, color-coded and cross-referenced with military precision, a moving truck rumbled down the street. New neighbors. Karen's heart quickened with anticipation. Fresh residents were always a challenge, but nothing gave her greater satisfaction than breaking in newcomers to the Primrose way of life. "Greg," she called to her husband, "we have new blood on the block. I'm going to welcome them properly." She straightened her HOA pin, checked her reflection, and grabbed the welcome packet containing 67 pages of community guidelines. Karen Winters was about to meet her match, though she didn't know it yet. As she stepped out onto her porch, she had no idea that the battle for Primrose Lane was just beginning. Karen's white tennis shoes squeaked against the pristine sidewalk as she marched toward the moving truck. A tall man with salt and pepper hair was directing the movers, pointing to various boxes with confident authority. Something about his bearing set off alarm bells in Karen's head. Military, she thought. They never respect civilian chain of command. "Welcome to Primrose Lane," Karen announced, extending her hand with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Karen Winters, president of the Primrose Homeowners Association." The man turned, his sunglasses reflecting Karen's own image back at her. "Mike Davidson," he replied, shaking her hand firmly. "Retired Marine Corps colonel. This is my wife, Sarah." A woman with cropped dark hair emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her jeans. Unlike her husband, Sarah's smile seemed genuine. "So nice to meet you. We've heard wonderful things about this neighborhood. Have you now?" Karen's smile tightened as she thrust the welcome packet into Mike's hands. "This contains all our community guidelines. I'd appreciate it if you could review them immediately. I notice your moving company has parked on the street without a prior permit, which is violation number. Is there a problem with the truck?" Mike interrupted, removing his sunglasses. His eyes were piercing, unintimidated. "Well, according to Regulation 15C, any service vehicle requires a permit filed 3 business days in advance," Karen explained, her voice taking on the authoritative tone that had cowed countless Primrose residents. Mike laughed, actually laughed, and Karen felt her cheeks grow hot. "We'll have it moved as soon as they're done unloading," he said dismissively, turning back to the movers. Karen stood there, momentarily speechless. Nobody dismissed Karen Winters. She felt a familiar fire ignite in her chest, the same feeling she'd had when fighting the apartment developer years ago. "I'll expect compliance with all regulations moving forward," she said stiffly. "The first HOA violation results in a warning, the second is a $100 fine, and the third begins legal proceedings." Mike turned back slowly. "Legal proceedings? For what exactly?" "Breach of contract. When you purchased this house, you agreed to abide by Primrose HOA regulations." Sarah stepped forward, placing a conciliatory hand on her husband's arm. "We'll certainly review everything, Mrs. Winters. We want to be good neighbors." But Karen had already spotted 3 potential violations: the moving blanket on the lawn, unapproved ground covering, a wind spinner Sarah had already installed by the front steps, prohibited garden ornament, and the American flag Mike was preparing to mount beside the door. Flagpoles required approval from the architectural committee. "I'll check back tomorrow to see how you're settling in," Karen said with forced pleasantness before turning on her heel. Walking home, Karen texted Linda, "New residents. Military. Problematic. Emergency HOA meeting tonight." That evening, 12 homeowners crowded into Karen's living room. Many looked tired or annoyed at the last-minute summons, but Karen ignored their expressions as she paced before them. "The sanctity of our community is at stake," she declared. "These new residents have already shown disregard for our regulations." "They just moved in today, Karen," sighed Tom Bennett, who had lived on Primrose Lane even longer than Karen. "Cut them some slack." "Slack leads to slippery slopes," Karen retorted. "Remember when we let the Patels install that satellite dish without proper approval?" Next thing we knew, there were 3 more on the block. The meeting ended with Karen establishing a rotation schedule to monitor the Davidsons' compliance. As the neighbors filed out, several exchanged eye rolls behind Karen's back. Her iron grip on Primrose Lane had been absolute for years, but even her staunchest supporters were growing weary of her crusades. Later that night, Karen stood at her bedroom window, watching as the Davidsons sat on their front porch, sharing a bottle of wine and laughing. A direct violation of Noise Ordinance 42F after 10 p.m. She tapped her pen against her violation notebook rhythmically. "You've met your match, Colonel," she whispered to herself. But deep inside, beneath layers of rules and righteousness, something else stirred. A faint memory of who she'd been before the HOA became her identity. For just a moment, the laughter floating across the night air sounded inviting rather than irritating. She shook the thought away and wrote down the violation: order above all. Independence Day dawned bright and clear over Primrose Lane. Karen had barely slept, wrestling with demons of pride and purpose throughout the night. By morning, she had made her decision. She would not attend the Davidsons' flag-raising ceremony or their backyard barbecue. She would stand firm as the last defender of proper order. But as the clock approached noon, Karen found herself drawn to her front window. The entire neighborhood had gathered around the new flagpole in the Davidsons' yard. Children clutched small American flags. Adults wore red, white, and blue. Even Mr. Finch, the 90-year-old veteran who rarely left his house, sat in a place of honor near the flagpole. "I won't go," Karen told herself firmly. "I won't validate this coup." Greg had left an hour earlier, casting a disappointed glance back at his wife before joining the festivities. Now he stood with the others, part of a community that Karen had somehow exiled herself from. Her doorbell rang, startling her. Karen opened it to find 9-year-old Zoe Garcia, the little girl whose family had received more HOA violations than anyone except the Davidsons. "Mrs. Winters," Zoe said, her voice solemn, "they sent me to get you. They said the ceremony can't start without you." "I'm sorry, Zoe, but I'm not feeling well today," Karen lied. Zoe tilted her head. "My mom says you're not sick, you're just scared." "Scared? I'm not scared of anything." Karen bristled. "She says sometimes it's scary when things change, even when the changes are good." Zoe held out her small hand. "Please come, I saved you a seat next to me." Something in the girl's earnest invitation broke through Karen's defenses. With a shaky sigh, she took Zoe's hand and allowed herself to be led across the street. A hush fell over the gathering as Karen approached. She expected smugness or hostility, but instead saw genuine smiles of welcome. Mike stepped forward. "Karen, we were hoping you'd join us," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sarah and I have been learning about Primrose Lane's history, about how a developer tried to destroy this neighborhood 10 years ago, and how one determined woman stopped it from happening." Karen blinked in surprise. "You built something important here," Mike continued. "A community that cares about itself. Maybe the rules got a little strict over time, but the foundation, neighbors looking out for each other, that's worth preserving." He gestured toward the flagpole where 2 flags waited to be raised, the American flag, and beneath it, a beautiful blue banner with a primrose flower in the center, surrounded by tiny houses forming a circle. "We'd like you to raise the Primrose Lane flag," Sarah said, stepping forward. As the founder of our community in its current form, a lump formed in Karen's throat as she moved toward the flagpole. Her hands trembled as she attached the community flag to the line. With a deep breath, she began to pull, raising the symbol she never knew she needed, a representation not of rules and regulations, but of connection and shared purpose. As the flags waved in the summer breeze, applause erupted. Karen turned to find herself surrounded by neighbors, not subjects to be controlled, but people who shared her love for this small corner of the world. "I may have been a bit inflexible," she admitted to Mike and Sarah as the crowd dispersed toward tables laden with potluck dishes. "And we came on a bit strong," Mike acknowledged. "But we've all learned something. Communities need both tradition and growth." Later, as twilight fell and neighbors prepared for fireworks, Karen found herself seated between Greg and Melissa Johnson, sharing stories of Primrose Lane's early days. For the first time in years, she felt the sweet relief of not having to police every interaction, document every violation. "So what happens now?" Linda asked as they watched children playing an impromptu game of flashlight tag across front lawns that, according to Regulation 56C, should have been off limits after dark. Karen took a sip of lemonade, considering the question. "Now we find balance," she said finally. "Some rules matter. Others need to evolve." As fireworks burst overhead, Karen caught Sarah's eye across the lawn. The woman who had been her nemesis raised her glass in a silent toast, and Karen found herself smiling back. The battle for Primrose Lane was over, but the neighborhood, her neighborhood, was stronger for it. Still, as she watched a sparkler leave a trail of light across the Bennett's pristine lawn, Karen couldn't quite stop herself from making a mental note to check the fire safety regulations tomorrow. Old habits died hard, after all, and Primrose Lane still needed someone to look out for it, just perhaps with a lighter touch than before. And as for Colonel Mike Davidson, Karen had to admit that sometimes, very occasionally, a worthy adversary could become an even worthier ally. The temporary peace lasted precisely 16 days. Karen had maintained a wary distance from HOA affairs, attending but not dominating meetings, and even sampling a tomato from the community garden, though she would never admit it was the best she'd tasted in years. The neighbors noticed the change, exchanging hopeful glances when Karen offered only mild suggestions rather than imperial decrees. Then came July 3rd and the flagpole incident. Karen was pulling weeds from her immaculate flower beds when the sound of power tools shattered the morning calm. She peered over her fence to see Mike Davidson mounting not just a standard house bracket for a flag, but digging a hole for what appeared to be a 20-foot flagpole in his front yard. Her heart raced as she sprinted inside for the HOA handbook. Flagpoles exceeding 6 feet required not only architectural committee approval, but also a city permit for structures over 15 feet. This was no minor infraction. This was architectural anarchy. "This ends now," Karen muttered, changing from her gardening clothes into her HOA battle uniform. Khaki pants, white polo shirt with embroidered Primrose Lane logo, and her president's badge dangling from a lanyard. Greg looked up from his crossword puzzle. "Karen, maybe just let this one." "Absolutely not. This is exactly how it starts. First a flagpole, then an above-ground pool, then someone parks an RV in their driveway, and suddenly we're living in a trailer park." Karen charged across the street, regulation manual clutched like a holy text. Several neighbors had gathered to help Mike, including the Garcia's teenage son who was mixing concrete. "Colonel Davidson." Karen's voice sliced through the friendly chatter. "This installation violates at least 3 separate regulations. I'm issuing an immediate cease and desist." Mike wiped sweat from his brow. "Morning, Karen. This flagpole is going up today, and tomorrow we're having a neighborhood 4th of July celebration right here. You're welcome to join us." "Did you obtain architectural committee approval? A city permit?" Karen demanded, flipping pages in her manual. "Both approved last week," Sarah replied, emerging from the house with a tray of lemonades. "Would you like to see the paperwork?" "Impossible. I'm head of the architectural committee." Tom Bennett stepped forward. "Not anymore, Karen. Remember the vote at last week's meeting?" "You were there, but you seemed distracted." Karen's mind raced back to the meeting she'd attended in body but not spirit, still processing her conflicted feelings about the garden rebellion. Had she missed something so critical? "We restructured the committees," Linda explained gently. "You're still president, but we've distributed responsibilities more equitably." Karen felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Her neighbors, her subjects, were gazing at her not with fear, but with something worse: pity. "This is my neighborhood," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Everything I've done has been to protect it." "We know that, Karen," Melissa Johnson said softly. "But protection doesn't have to mean control." Something inside Karen hardened again. The brief window of self-reflection slammed shut. "Fine. Install your monstrous flagpole, but be warned, I'll be reviewing every decision this new committee makes. Every single one." She turned to leave, but paused when Mike called after her. "The flag-raising ceremony is at noon tomorrow. We'd really like you to be there, Karen. It's not just an American flag we're raising. It's also a Primrose Lane community flag that Sarah designed. This neighborhood means something to all of us, including you." Karen didn't respond, marching back to her house with rigid posture that belied her inner turmoil. That evening, she sat alone on her back patio while Greg attended a planning meeting for the 4th of July celebration, a meeting to which Karen had received an invitation but had ceremoniously torn to shreds. From her position, she could see into the Davidsons' backyard, where tables were being set up, string lights hung, and a banner painted, "Primrose Lane United." United without her. The thought stung more than she expected. Karen retrieved a dusty photo album from the hall closet, something she hadn't looked at in years. There she was, a decade younger, serving homemade ice cream at the block party, laughing as Greg missed a horseshoe toss, helping plant the original Primrose Lane welcome sign. When had protecting the neighborhood become more important than being part of it? Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Davidson. "Flag raising at noon tomorrow. There's a special role we'd like you to play, if you're willing." This neighborhood wouldn't be what it is without you. Karen stared at the message for a long time, unexpected tears blurring her vision. She didn't respond, but for the first time in weeks, she truly considered what it might mean to lay down her arms in the battle for Primrose Lane.